Hey everybody, welcome back to the Convo Couch. I am Fiorella, and I am here today with Oz on the ones and twos. So Oz, you have to say hi because we're doing this together. Um, I have a great guest today. He's going to be talking to me about the truckers and the. We're going to talk about the left because there was so much that happened while I was in New York, and talking to people about the vaccine mandates ruining their lives and talking to people about how it's not a left right issue, right? And then we have the Canadian trucker protest movement. And all day today and all day in the last like 48 hours, the left has just been crapping on this movement, trying to make it a right-wing fascist movement. So I'm just really fucking done with them. They're just so much a part of what I don't want to be, and they're not what I would consider the real left, because when you go to socialist countries in the global south, um, before the guest comes, I've got a couple sections that I want to do. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe to all this stuff because we've been out of the algorithm, but the last few panels we did on COVID were really great. So we're going to do some more of those. But yeah, so thank you guys for supporting us, of course, as always. I'm going to get started though, because we don't have too much time until the guest comes. And I, sorry, I'm a little bit like low energy because I just got back yesterday and I'm like super tired. And my computer's been screwing with the slides, but give me a second. I'll go to them. Let's see. We're just gonna start with the first part. It's just my computer it's being dumb. Okay, so I didn't get to cover this because this happened, I think, late Thursday, and I was traveling. But the State Department spook, that is Ned Price, he was slammed by a journalist from none other than the AP for providing no evidence of the Russian false flag. Okay, and the Russian false flag is what the United States is claiming, that Russia is engaging in these false flags to try to make the US look bad with crisis actors. This is what they claimed. It sounds like the journalist himself said it like just like Alex Jones would put it. And so this AP reporter got into it pretty badly with the Ned Price. Now, Ned Price, we're going to go over who he is, but he used to be part of the CIA. And I don't know if you ever actually are away. Once you're part of the CIA, I think you are still part of the CIA. But he said that these allegations were Alex Jones territory. And Ned Price is just, he's not a nobody. He was the first openly gay spokesperson. And when he was selected by the Biden administration, it was just this gigantic big thing because you know how liberals love identity politics. But he's also a longtime national security hand who spent over a decade at the CIA, including 3 years serving as the National Security Council spokesperson under Barack Obama. Then he left in 2017, saying that he didn't like Donald Trump. He expressed alarm at Trump and his approach to U.S. intelligence. And he obviously criticized him frequently all over the mainstream media. And that's no surprise because duh. And so he's obviously a spook. He's obviously somebody that, went from the CIA to the State Department. Almost, those two are almost interchangeable when you talk in terms of covert agencies, in terms of what they do and how much control they have. And so Ned Price is somebody that represents the epitome of what Julian Assange sought to expose, right? And I later said something on a tweet where I was talking about how he's the type of person that will manufacture consent for this new proxy war that they're trying to do. But this has happened before. This is their playbook. This is the type of person. We've seen it with the Syrian chemical attacks. We've seen it with the WMDs when we, during the Iraq, right before we went to war. And so this is exactly the same playbook they do. And you should pay attention to that because this is nothing new, but you have to get used to the certain talking points that they say so you can quickly see through this, because what is often happening is a lot of the cappuccino communists and people who just don't understand foreign policy as a whole make caveats to the situation. They say, well, Russia has oligarchs and Russia is no longer the USSR and we need to stand up for the people of Ukraine. When you make those statements, you completely allow there to be room for a attempted coup, a color revolution, and so on and so forth. So I think to me, you have to be careful about what you say in terms of manufacturing consent, especially when it's not based in reality, when Russia isn't really the aggressor here, it's the United States. And again, I'm going to go over that for the 20 billionth time after this video, but let's watch the video. It's like 5 minutes, but I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to cut it halfway through and discuss some things. So let it play, Oz.
Okay, well, that's quite a mouthful there. So you said actions such as these suggest otherwise, meaning they suggest they're not interested in talks and they're going to go ahead with some kind of what action are you talking about?
One, the actions I've just pointed to. The fact that Russia continues to engage in disinformation campaigns.
You made an allegation that they might do that. Have they actually done it?
What we know, Matt, is what I've just said, that they have engaged in this activity, in this planning activity. But let me because obviously this is not the first time we've made these reports public. You'll remember that just a few weeks ago.
I'm sorry, made what report public?
If you'll let me finish, I will tell you what report we made public. We told you a few weeks ago that we have information indicating Russia also has already prepositioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine. So that, Matt, to your question, is an action that Russia has already taken.
It's an action that you say that they have taken, but you have shown no evidence to confirm that. And I'm going to get to the next question here, which is, what is the evidence that they... I mean, this is like crisis actors, really? This is like Alex Jones territory you're getting into now. What evidence do you have to support the idea that there is some propaganda film in the making?
Matt, this is derived from information known to the U.S. government, intelligence information that we have declassified. I think you know...
Okay, well, where is it? Where is this information?
It is intelligence information that we have declassified.
Well, where is it? Where's the declassified information?
I just delivered it.
No, you made a series of allegations and statements.
Would you like us to print out the topper? Because you will see a transcript of this briefing that you can print out for yourself.
That's not evidence, Ned. That's you saying it. That's not evidence. I'm sorry.
What would you like, Matt?
I would like to see some proof that you can show that
Matt, you have been
that shows that the Russians are doing this. Ned, I've been doing this for a long time.
I know, that was my point. You have been doing this for quite a while. You know that when we declassify intelligence information, we do so with an eye to protecting sources and methods.
It's not going to fall. I remember a lot of things. So where is the declassified information other than you coming out here and saying?
Matt, I'm sorry you don't like the format, but we have declassified.
It's not the format; it's the content.
I'm sorry you don't like the content. I'm sorry you are doubting the information that is in the possession of the U.S. government.
No,
what I'm telling you is that this is information that's available to us. We are making it available to you in order for a couple reasons. One is to attempt to deter the Russians from going ahead with this activity. Two, in the event we're not able to do that, in the event the Russians do go ahead with this, to make it clear as day, to lay bare the fact that this has always been an attempt on the part of the Russian Federation to fabricate a pretext.
Yeah, but you don't have any evidence to back it up other than what you're saying. It's like you're saying, we think we have information the Russians may do this, but you won't tell us what the information is. And then when you're asked...
That is the idea behind deterrence, Matt. That is the idea behind deterrence. It is our hope that the Russians don't go forward with this.
You say, I just gave it to you. But that's not what
you seem not to understand. You seem not to understand the idea of deterrence. We are trying to deter the Russians from moving forward with this type of activity. That is why we're making it public today. If the Russians don't go forward with this, that is not ipso facto an indication that they never had plans to do so.
But then it's unprovable. I mean, my God, what is the evidence that you have that suggests that the Russians are even planning this?
Matt,
I'm not saying that they're not. But you just come out and say this and expect us just to believe it without you showing a shred of evidence that it's actually true. Other than when I ask, or when anyone else asks, what's the information? You said, well, I just gave it to you, which was just you making a statement.
Matt, you said yourself, you've been in this business for quite a long time. You know that when we make information, intelligence information public, we do so in a way that protects sensitive sources and methods. You also know that we declassify information only when we're confident in that information. If you doubt the credibility of the U.S. government, of the British government, of other governments, and want to find solace in information that the Russians are putting out, that is for you to do.
I'm not asking what the Russian government is putting out, and what is it supposed to mean?
The video, because U.S. officials are describing.
Okay, so. I don't know where to begin with that. Where do you begin with that? So he literally won't say what the evidence is. And I've had this same argument, I swear to God, with these idiots on Twitter. I'm like, please show me evidence. Somebody was like, you're rich. I'm like, please show me evidence that I'm rich. Please show me evidence that, like, Mike Preisner, and I'm not going to talk about him today. I'll talk about him Wednesday with pasta, because I think that'll be the better conversation. But he was like giving these statistics that were completely ridiculous. I'm not even going to go there because we're on YouTube, but they were completely ridiculous. And I'm like, can you please give me documentation? Documentation is that the consensus and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, that's not documentation. He's literally doing this same thing, gaslighting the hell out of this journalist, saying, well, I already gave you the evidence. And he shifts his tone. Initially, he's like, no, this is what the Russians are doing. And then when he's like, what exactly are they doing? Like, what evidence do you have of what they're doing? I just told you. He's like, no, you didn't. You just said that they're doing this, but you haven't talked about the evidence that they have. And then he goes on, and then he admits, he's like, well, this is we have to be careful. We can't just we have to protect our sources, which is rich of them talking about this, because when Julian Assange is protecting his sources and refused to talk about this, they also accused him of being a Russian asset. They accused him of helping Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. They accused him of everything under the table. And they accused him of being a hacker. And Julian Assange, of course, was protecting his sources. So it's very rich of the State Department that is persecuting and prosecuting right now Julian Assange to talk about sources and protecting anything of that sort. Because look what happened to all these whistleblowers. So it's just, to me, beyond a joke. Like the fact that these people are in charge. And of course, this guy's used to operating like that. He's a robot. He's a CIA spook. And it shows. And then at the end, of course, he accuses this journalist, who's an AP journalist. I mean, imagine if it was like one of us that like when we go to interview presidential candidates, we ask them real questions. We don't ask them like ridiculous questions. The fact that he pushed back is really interesting to me, because that kind of says something about the media and how, it's getting harder for the State Department to really just continue acting in status quo, the way they've been doing, the way they've been duping people, because people are starting to ask questions. And even this journalist from the AP was like, okay, but you're not giving me anything. And then he accused the journalist of being like a Russian, favoring the Russian government, essentially. I mean, he did it in not directly saying those words, but he said, if you don't want to believe in what we're saying or what other governments are saying, and you want to believe what the Russians are saying, you can go right ahead. It's it's gaslighting, but it's also very passive aggressive. And it's disgusting to see that these are the people that are in charge. And by the way, the State Department has more power than a lot of the people that are pushed out in front of you, including members of Congress, including the president himself. So that's worth remembering. And so Edward Snowden had an opinion on this. And he said, this is wild. The State Department spokesman can't even comprehend why the Associated Press feels the need to distinguish between a claim and a fact, and became visibly offended and then angered by the suggestion that his claims may require evidence to be accepted as credible, because they've been doing this for so long without having accountability to no one, that they're so aghast that somebody in the press, in the bought legacy media, dares to question them. Because believe me, that they don't have just anybody allowed to ask those questions. They have a list of people that are allowed to ask those questions. So they weren't expecting that. And you can tell by his body language that he wasn't expecting that, by how quickly he got flustered. So it's really hilarious. It was hilarious watching it, but it's also very disturbing that that's how this person felt, right? And in the same vein that they try to gaslight this reporter, the defenders, right? The journalists that have no conviction, because I will give that journalist from the AP credit for asking that question. But there's a journalist from CNN, right, that decided to smear Tara Reade over pushing against this war propaganda that we've been seeing. And I attended a anti-war event. It wasn't really a march. It was not really a protest as much as like an event where a bunch of people, Code Pink, Answer Coalition, were speaking, some members of PSL, all entities that have issues with probably PSL and some others the most, but they were saying hands off of Ukraine, hands off Russia, no war with Russia. And they were giving all these speeches, and that was in New York. There were several. There was one in Madison. There's demonstrations all over the country, but of course they're really tiny because we don't have an anti-war movement. But of course, Tara Reade has been, writing for RT. She has a podcast, and she has been advocating for peace and advocating a non-interventionist approach between the United States and Russia. And this guy named Edward Isaac Dovers said Tara Reade, the one-time Biden accuser who once disavowed her past pro-Russia blog posts as creative writing, has been promoting Russia's position in the Ukraine situation in recent tweets, including through promoting articles from Kremlin media. And, he listed several of her articles and things that she posted, which is nothing new. But if you look at where he's from, he's a senior reporter for CNN. And so it's no surprise that these people in media are trying to push down and attack a lot of these media figures, these new media figures like Tara Reade. And also the fact that he mentioned a once-time Biden accuser, which is a shot at what happened to her, a shot at perhaps the validity of her character, of her integrity. And that's what these people do. They attack the person rather than refute the actual substance of the argument. Did he provide any evidence for his assertions? No. This is my point. They don't provide any evidence whatsoever. And Tara bravely said, Edward, you have been coming at me with this since 2019. You want to debate? Let's go. Name the venue. You are a stenographer for American intelligence. And that's exactly what he is. One-time Biden accuser? How many times does sexual assault have to happen? I am pro-peace, no war with Russia. So I wanted to give Tara some credit, because what she experienced and what she went through, and what she experiences on the daily from these liberal mouthpieces for the State Department, is it takes a lot to really withstand it. And I know what it's like to experience some assholes, but just what she went through. And I think it's just it's crazy. They send out their goons. They did it in Nicaragua when we were there. They did it. They do it all the time, when it comes to pushing their imperialist agenda. And so make no mistake that Nancy Pelosi, Lindsey Graham, all these politicians are coming together to push this war with Russia. Lindsey Graham has said as much. He has said that they have never been more united. Now, the last time they were this united was the Iraq war. And he said this very, very happily. And he gave a applaud to Nancy Pelosi for bringing every member of Congress together to get this done. And Nancy Pelosi was talking about how she's got to stop. We, the American people, have to stop the Russian expansion and Russia's aggressiveness and defend the sovereignty of Ukraine, even though we're literally still supplying weapons to neo-Nazis. And we did that a few years ago in 2014. And the results of that were civil unrest and people dying and a lot of warfare and a lot of economic just upheaval. But that's the false flag is not being put on by Russia. It's being put on by the United States. And so this is the playbook. There's nothing new here. And just wanted to go over that because I think more people need to really assess, like, it's not just the fact that, this guy's a warmonger. It's the fact that this happens all the time and people still don't recognize the pattern and how deep it goes and how powerful the State Department is when it comes to pushing for war. It's beyond Congress. It's beyond the puppets in Biden and Kamala Harris. It's the State Department and the surveillance agencies that really push this. So yeah, let me pull up I'll do it next time. I'll pull up the Rokfin for the next one. So I'm just going to go to the next section, Oz. So Stacey Abrams, and I almost didn't talk about this, but the reason I want to talk about it isn't because Stacey Abrams is a shitlib and Jamal Bowman is a shitlib, because they are, but it's more of like the lines of what how this looks, what this says about the pandemic protocols and all these things. Because Stacey Abrams and Jamal Bowman were found maskless with kids who were masked. And I think that, a lot of the criticisms of the anti-mandate crowd have been focused on these, people being irresponsible, not wearing masks, and how we need to protect our children and have them masked. But if you go through any day of the week, you will find politicians and people of power, people who have money, not abiding by the rules. And these people who have been pushing, these COVIDian obsessed people on the left who have been pushing all of this as a virtue signal, don't ever talk about this. They never talk about how this is only really, really pushed on the working class. And that's something that needs to be talked about. So this post, which, I'm pretty sure they're conservatives, but it's called Libs of TikTok, and they always post like they make fun of Democrats, right? But this is something that actually happened. So Stacey Abrams and this other person named H.M. Brookins both deleted their tweets. And I'm going to read one of the tweets there. Stacey Abrams had posted this tweet retweeting Holly Brookins, saying, "Spending time with Glenwood's amazing students, faculty, and staff ranks as spectacular, delightful, and outstanding. Thank you for having me." And in one of those pictures, you can see the masked kids and the maskless Stacey. And then what happened after the fact was that the principal who tweeted the photos that Stacey retweeted deleted her account. And then, of course, Stacey deleted the tweet. Why would she do that? Well, here's the picture of her sitting in a classroom full of masked little kids. So let's just pose this really quickly. Like, why is this such a big deal? And I'm not going to be like an asshole like some people were, but so you have kids that are like the percentage, I think it's like 99.87. It's something ridiculous like that are likely to, survive this virus, or likely to not be affected by this virus. They'll get it. I mean, they can get COVID, but they're likely not to be affected. And even though, the CDC has kind of flip-flopped on the masks, they recently talked about how the N95 masks are the ones that people should have. And so you just see a plethora of masks there. But Stacey Abrams isn't wearing one, and she's a politician that's coming into a classroom, and she based on her, and I'm not trying to be an asshole, but based on her weight and her size, is more likely to be severely impacted by this. And so a lot of people went that route, but for me it's more of like the connotations of positions of power and wealth, and how that allows her to not have to have the rules applied to her, rules for thee but not for me. It's the same thing I saw at the Met Gala, where AOC was wearing her tax the rich dress and has a bunch of like plebs hold her dress in masks, while none of those people are wearing masks. None of the attendees are wearing masks, but all the plebs were wearing, all the workers were wearing masks. And that irritates me, because if it was really about health, you would be consistent throughout. And it's stupid that as a person that's running for office, because she's running for governor again, you don't see through that. Like, it's this whole arrogance that you think you're beyond it, beyond any criticism. And it shows, because there was no accountability, because this is what she posted on her Instagram. She said, "It is shameful that our opponents are using a Black History Month reading event for Georgia children as the impetus for a false political attack. And it is pitiful and predictable that our opponents continue to look for opportunities to distract from their failed records when it comes to protecting public health during the pandemic." One of Stacey's opponents downplayed the virus while trading stocks to profit off the pandemic after his private coronavirus briefing as a senator. Another of her opponents attacked mayors seeking to protect their citizens and has failed to expand access to Medicaid even as rural hospitals close. This pathetic, transparent, and silly attack is beneath anyone who claims he wants to lead Georgia. So she's saying that she's being attacked unfairly, and this is just political. But a lot of people, a lot of regular people that have nothing to do with her state or her governorship election, were pissed, and understandably so. And Jamal Bauman, the same thing. He was caught maskless at a high school, and it's just the same exact thing. He went to New York high school, and students were masked up around him. And this was taken on at New Rochelle High School on January 31st. I met some people in New York that were in Bowman's district, and they really do not like him, and they think he's probably one of the worst ones that out of the whole, squad progressive bunch. But this is where he was visiting with the students and discussing a recent murder with the community. But you guys can see the picture right here. Everybody's masked. He isn't. Why? Like, it's just so stupid to me. Like, it's just so dumb. Why are we even discussing this? But it's like, more proof. What more proof do you need that this isn't about this is about your health? Like, this is about virtue signaling, right? This is about, oh, we're gonna do it at other times, but by the way, we're politicians, we're exempt. It's the same thing that people get mad at celebrities for. Oh, celebrities get to skip the line, celebrities get to park wherever they want, celebrities, but it's your politicians are celebrities, and your politicians are influencers, especially AOC, and that's all they're doing, being influencers and celebrities. And I find it really, like, I don't know, I find it really obnoxious that that they get to do that, and people are saying, oh, you're only criticizing them because they're Black. I could find you a million other, not a million, but like a ton of other politicians who do the same thing and who aren't, who are white, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing with AOC. The same thing. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. I'm gonna read a Super Ray from Trey Wright. Thank you for the Super Ray contribution. It is always appreciated. And thank you guys all for joining me. It's going to get really, really good here in the next couple minutes when we have our guest on. I want to start talking about Joe Rogan, though, because Joe Rogan, and make sure to share the link for this, because a lot of people aren't really talking about the issue with Joe Rogan, in my opinion, in the best way possible. A lot of people have made like this, like a fan out of him, like a hero out of him. And I'm not saying really anything against the guy, but to me, it's just more of like, I don't know. It's just beyond that. It's beyond the censoring. I don't really think somebody of his platform is really truly getting censored, because it's about what he signifies and the things he's saying that other people have been saying that is getting spread out, that is really being censored. It's not really, you know, Joe Rogan himself, but what he represents. And so he deleted his videos, you know, and he made this whole apology about using the N-word. And even though it was out of context, he did this whole thing where he apologized about it. And he, you know, he was just very apologetic. And I think Pasta talked about it. You don't apologize to these people. These people, it's never going to be enough if you apologize to them. Like they're never going to like you better. In fact, they're going to double down and say that your apology was not genuine. And they're going to say, oh, you're just doing it to look better. So it's not worth apologizing to these people, but he did. And not only that, he removed, because it came out that it was actually him, he removed videos because Spotify said that they didn't. They weren't the ones who did it. So, and then they can't per their contract. So I'm going to go into it right now. Give me a second as my thing freezes up. It's obnoxious. Let me go back. It's so weird what happens. Give me a second, guys. A second. Why can't I find this? Okay, so if you just have it up there, I can do it. Okay, so Spotify actually said that Joe Rogan removed the episodes himself, and it was like 70 episodes, I think, so far that have been removed. You can go to the next. Yeah, there we go. So so they said it was Rogan's decision to remove these episodes, and this was following the discussions with the company about how some of the content on his show, including his history of using more racially insensitive language. In his statement, Daniel X said it was after those talks and Rogan's own reflections that the podcast host chose to remove a number of episodes from Spotify, and stressed that the comments do not represent the values of the company. Of course, they have to say that. And by the way, I obviously don't think most people agree with people using words that are racist or anything like that. I think that's I think I understand why people were upset. However, I just feel like this whole thing is now going to be expanded to, because it wasn't used in that context. And I'm not saying he should have said it. Okay, I don't think he should have, but like now it's going to be all like, oh well, what other word is he not going to be able to, like, what other words are we going to censor now? What other things are we not going to be allowed to say? Because it's a slippery slope. And this has been happening with a lot of things. They're counseling people's like older shows or removing things that are offensive, because this generation is offended by literally everything. Everything offends everybody. Everything is, needs to be PC. And I think that's making people more angry. And I think that's why you're getting a lot of people leaving the left because there are important things that we can focus on that aren't about like censoring speech. Even if it's bad speech, it's just, you know, what you do is you correct yourself and you move on. You don't try to make it to get rid of its existence ever. And so they criticized too the episodes, obviously, with Robert Malone and Peter McCullough, and the website JRE Missing, which tracks missing episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience and records when they were removed from Spotify, first noted that 70 podcast episodes disappeared from the streaming platform on Friday. The Washington Post confirmed the number, though there was one episode that was split into two parts. So yeah, I just think like he shouldn't have apologized for the misinformation, because that's what he started apologizing for. And then out of all of that, that's how they landed on this stuff, because they didn't care before. No, like this has been there forever. They didn't care before. They started caring now. That's when they began to care, when it could be something used against the narrative that he was pushing back on. And so this is The Rock came out on his defense initially, saying, you know, he had the right to say that, etc. But then as soon as the N-word situation came up, he said, oh, I didn't know about this. So he said, thank you so much for this. I hear you as well as everyone here 100%. I was not aware of his N-word use prior to my comments, but now I've become more educated to his complete narrative. Learning moment for me. Mahalo, brother, and have a great and productive weekend. So it's just kind of like, oh, well, now you can't touch this, right? And I get it. I'm not saying it's something he shouldn't necessarily. I just feel like it was in context. It was in context, and people are taking it out of the context, and people say that doesn't matter. It matters. But at the end of the day, I think it's fine for him to apologize about that, but now it's like there's a free-for-all in censorship. Now everything could be censored, and that's exactly the point, because they didn't care before when it was about anything else. But they started caring when he was having these doctors he interviewed, which this is what it's about. It's not about these doctors. It's not even about them. It's not about Joe Rogan. It's about literally the narrative that he's pushing back against. And of course, Rumble today offered him $100 million to leave Spotify, and told him he wouldn't be censored. But I think, the overall thing is like, Joe Rogan is a rich man, and he could literally leave and start his own platform. He's not doing it, but he could. And a lot of people are making a martyr out of him. And I think it's more along the lines of the people that have been pushing back up at this, the people that have been pushing against this narrative. They're the ones that are going to be screwed regardless of what happens with Rogan, because Spotify wasn't touching it. And then the Karens came in and the mob police, and then they did. And now it's going to set a precedent using this whole thing of racism to really, in this whole faux outrage, to really go after the rest of us and the rest of media. So I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen people say that yet, really. And I think that's really what this is about. It's about shutting down other voices, not necessarily Rogan's. Rogan has a powerful influence, but everybody else who was validated through what he was doing is now going to be free range. They're going to be, vulnerable to this. And we have our great guest right now, and I want to introduce Alexander McKay. How are you doing?
Hi, Fee. I'm fine. How are you doing? Greetings from England.
Oh wow! I didn't know you were there. Okay, thanks for coming on such short notice. But I really wanted to have you on because you have seen what's been happening the last few days with this whole situation. with the Canadian truckers. And I think your co-host was just on with Max Blumenthal having a conversation.
Yes, yes. The fringe minority of white supremacists is apparently holding the nation to ransom by honking their horns in the center of Ottawa. It's a scandal right up there with January 6th, which is what the very idiotic former governor of the Bank of England and potential Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said today. So yeah, and of course, as you know, the U.S., Canadian, and British left have all joined in with denouncing the truckers as a far-right conspiracist movement run by business interests. So nothing out of the ordinary there, given what you were discussing about the censorship of Rogan. It's all kind of tied together, really. If you want to make somebody go away, just throw the racist, white supremacist term at them and hope that the smell of that just puts people off investigating what is a legitimate protest.
Right. So it started with GoFundMe, and I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to ask you your opinion on this whole section, because it started with GoFundMe, and they did a whole thing where they decided to pull the funding of the Freedom Convoy 2022 fundraiser, which is something that I honestly don't know if they've ever done before. I can't be certain, but I didn't think that it happened before. A lot of people use this. I've used GoFundMe. A lot of people in independent media have used it. And so they said that law enforcement showed that the previously peaceful demonstration became an occupation with police reports of violence and other unlawful activity. And so they went from, pulling it and giving it to certain organizations of the convoy to just returning it thereafter to the people who donated, right? And they weren't going to do that until they got called out, and there was so much pushback. They got ratioed online, and a lot of people started pulling their GoFundMes out, never again, and all this stuff. And so they kind of sort of try to vindicate themselves by giving the donations back and saying that they were just simplifying the process and automatically refunding donations, which isn't true. They weren't doing that until they were pretty much forced to. But our friend Alex Rubenstein posted this tweet that I thought was really, really telling of really what's happening. And the Ottawa police, right, said that anyone attempting to bring material support, gas, etc., to the demonstrations could be subject to arrest. Enforcement is underway. So he said the Ottawa police and GoFundMe are setting precedents that essentially make protesting impossible, and the left is silent. I want to hear your opinion on that, because I 100% agree with that.
Well, if they want to strangle a protest, what you do is, you don't actually, if you're the police, you don't actually go for a frontal assault quite a lot of the time. You try and intimidate people away from supporting it. You try and make life, particularly if it's an occupation, which is essentially what this is, you try and make life for those doing the occupation as difficult as possible, cut them off from supporters, cut them off from supplies, intimidate anybody who might be tempted to join it from joining in solidarity. Try and put legal costs on people which they can't possibly afford to pay. This is all the standard tactics that police across most of the advanced capitalist nations have used for nearly 20 years now. And as to the left being silent on it, well, the left are silent on it because the left doesn't do material analysis anymore. It does feelings, basically. It does the feels. They look at this. This Canadian truckers protest, and they look at the people on it, and it triggers them, and they decide that they can't possibly have this. It's like they look at, if they find a few symbols, they find like one guy waving a Confederate flag, God knows who he was. One guy with a swastika, again, God knows who he was, could have been anybody. Could have been, an officer of the Canadian police forces undercover, who knows? And then they use that to say, look, the whole thing is illegitimate. And then they say that for that reason, we can legitimately call for the state to crush it or not protest when the state crushes it because it's right wing. Even though, like, if you look at the demonstration, if you look at what the truckers on it and those who've organized it are actually demanding, what are they demanding? They're demanding the end of the vaccine mandates for the truck drivers, and they're demanding more broadly that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian equivalent of the US Constitution, really, is respected, and this government stops violating it. So again, like, I've met some hard right people in my time. I've met some far rightists. None of them are going around doing demonstrations for constitutional government. None of them are going around doing demonstrations for bodily autonomy. And then you look at the composition of it, and you can see that the truck driving profession and those who are supporting it, it's a diverse demonstration. It reflects like the diversity of Canada itself. So what are we now saying, that there's Sikh truck drivers and Black Canadians and Native Canadians, Indigenous tribes who have been supporting the demonstration? Are they all part of a far right movement now? And furthermore, they've also denounced it, like Jacobin magazine in its typical hysterical and ill-informed style denounced it today as like something that was backed by the employers. When if you've been looking at this, the Employers Federation that covers like the trucking companies have denounced it over and over again, and they support the mandates. And so what the left, the Jacobin people and others do is they find some billionaire who's said something favorable about it, or they find some rich guy who's might be right-wing who's donated some money. But to call it like an employer-backed protest isn't correct. And we had someone on the podcast last week, a Canadian trucker based in America, this guy called Gold McGill, who talked to us about the way that the portrayal of these truckers like owner-operators isn't telling the whole truth. A lot of these guys are owner-operators in the same way that like an Uber driver is, you know? Mm-hmm. You are a independent contractor who's responsible for like running and maintaining this very expensive piece of equipment, the truck. Like you're not a business guy like hiring and firing people. You're basically a worker who's been reclassified as an independent contractor so that the employers can avoid their obligations. I found that out after 5 minutes of actually speaking to somebody. But you could look that up on an internet search. The left's approach to this is both hysterical and lazy, and they just are at this point now where they cannot admit, many of them, that they made the wrong calls on COVID and the COVID regulatory state regime that grew out of the crisis of 2020. And so they're basically just calling anybody who opposes mandates right-wingers, you know, an uprising of people in Guadeloupe against French colonialism triggered by vaccine mandates and opposition to them. Are they all part of a right-wing conspiracy? Italian workers rising up against Mario Draghi's attempts at the Green Pass in Italy. Are they all part of this conspiracy? I mean, it's insane, and it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. And for some people, the only reason I can really see that they're doing it is as a virtue signaling performance to people in the Democratic Party and its Democratic Party aligned media elites, basically.
Yeah, and you mentioned like they're all emotional, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, there's no logical talking, there's no rationalization. It's just it's if somebody has been associated with the right in any way, shape, or form, or if it's about an ideology that they don't approve, then they won't listen to anything that is said, even if it's something that could be valid, like a protest against vaccine mandates. And you talked about how how it's just so they call them petty bourgeois, and even though textbook definition, you could argue that they are exactly like you said, that they don't necessarily own, these are working people that are at the disposition of an economic situation where they'll either be fired if they don't comply with this vaccine mandate, or, you know, they comply and then they risk whatever they think they risk getting. And so to me, it's coercive, but it's also something that the left should give into. I mean, we have seen the diversity of these protests. We have seen the Sikhs, we have seen the native people of the region. We have also seen a lot of women there, and none of that's talked about. All that you see is like the one picture of the one Nazi flag and the one Confederate flag in Canada, where Confederate flags don't mean anything to Canada. So I just laugh. I'm like, what? And it's crazy. And I just wanted to point out a couple of people who exemplify just that, because Alex was dealing with them earlier. So there was this Jay Watts guy, and he said that the talk of the left in Canada for the past week has been that the police are both working with these facho creeps, and that they will use this to opportunistically demand more funding and power. And Alex said, typical leftist response, logical inconsistencies to rationalize ideological immovability. How can the police be working with the protesters while simultaneously criminalizing the act of militarily aiding them? And so it's almost like these people haven't been to a protest ever, because when you're at a protest, most of the time somebody's communicating with the police, even if they're adversarial to the protest. You're still communicating with the police on either end. But I wanted to play real quick the video of this law enforcement officer, because I think it puts us to the bigger issue for me, which is the surveillance state, the power that both the surveillance state and of course their minions, which are the police, have over working people and have over crushing any sort of movement that is anti-status quo and that is a threat. And I think it's important because this is in coalition, of course, with things like mutual aid. These are issues that the left has celebrated: mutual aid and going after law enforcement for their abusive power. All cops are bastards. I see some of these people on Twitter with ACAB on their Twitter profiles, and they're cheering for this cop. So I just want to, let's hear what he says and then we'll discuss.
We have increased ability to identify and target protesters and supporters of protesters who are funding and enabling unlawful and harmful activity by the protesters themselves. Investigative evidence gathering teams are collecting financial, digital, vehicle registration, driver identification, insurance status, and other related evidence that will be used in prosecutions. Every unlawful act, including traffic and insurance violations, will be fully pursued, regardless of the origin, at any time in the future. The primary focus of each of these measures will be on the unlawful behavior connected to the ongoing demonstrations. This includes parallel and counter demonstrations. We strongly urge all demonstrators and those engaging with the demonstrators to act lawfully, peacefully, and respectfully. The hatred, the violence, the illegal acts that Ottawa residents and businesses have endured over the last week is unacceptable in any circumstance. The Ottawa Police Service and the City of Ottawa are bringing significantly greater resources to restore order, hold offenders to account, and protect our neighborhoods. The current demonstration in the Parliamentary Precinct Red Zone remains unresolved despite significant successes in reducing the number of trucks and demonstrators while preventing riots, injuries, or deaths. We take no solace in these operational successes to date. Our goal is to end the demonstration. The demonstrators in the Red Zone area remain highly organized, well-funded, extremely committed to resisting all attempts to end the demonstration safely. This remains, as it was from the beginning, an increasingly volatile and increasingly dangerous demonstration.
All right. So, what are your thoughts on that? And I'll let you go, but to me, it's really scary that they can go, and this is what we've been talking about. This is one of the reasons I've been against the mandates. It's the digital ID passports, the verification, the surveillance of people, being able to cut you off from any source of income, any source of ability to organize. That's, to me, it is extremely frightening.
Well, they've tried this over and over again for many, many years. There was a very infamous example of this almost 40 years ago now, 38 years ago, when the government of the day in this country tried to cut off the National Union of Mine Workers from the banking system, forced them to sort of carry around all their resources in cash, tried to cut their families off from the welfare system. They had to rely on charitable donations given in solidarity by other working class people just to keep their strike going, and they did for a year. So this is what the state will do when it's challenged. And as time has gone on over the last 30 years, the people who run the state are trying to put themselves in a position where no one can challenge them, where all degree of where democratic challenges, even peaceful demonstrations, are ruled almost illegal. We saw this 20 years ago when they rushed through all the so-called anti-terrorism legislation in the wake of 9/11. We got a whole load of so-called anti-terrorist legislation here that effectively makes any kind of demonstration illegal if they want to make it, if the cops or the state or national authorities want to make it illegal, they can just say it's terrorism. And I've been on demonstrations where they've said they've held us and they've said, right, unless you disperse, we're all going to charge you with offenses under the Terrorism Act, which is so broad they can basically do anything they like with it. And Canada has similar legislation. We know that the United States does, and Britain does. So this is a common trend. The European countries all have this as well. That they look to insulate themselves completely from any expression of dissent, because certainly all dissent, even the tiny amount that did exist within like the existing parliamentary institutions, has disappeared. And so therefore they seek to intimidate and terrify anybody who wants to join any kind of demonstration. As with any other freedom under capitalism, you're free to exercise it as long as it doesn't make a difference. The moment it starts to make a difference, then they will come down on you like a ton of shit. And in many ways, one of the other big precursors to this was what happened to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks when they tried to cut them out of the global financial system over 10 years ago now. And again, lots of us protested that at the time. Lots of the same people who are denouncing the truckers now wouldn't come out for Assange then, still won't now, because they believe the smear campaign run by the British and the American states. So this is what they do. Like, you're free to exercise all these freedoms that are in the American Constitution, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or the odd mishmash of laws that we've got here, as long as it doesn't make any kind of difference. And the moment that it does, that's when they get serious. And with this guy, I mean, it's an intimidation tactic. I doubt that they can actually do all the things that he's threatening, but that's not the point. The point is he's going out of his way to basically say that you can come down here and be a perfectly law-abiding person. We'll find something to get you on. And you know that they can. And we saw this with people here over the last 10 years. Like there was still cases going through the courts of people who'd been caught up in the riots in London in 2011, who were still facing criminal charges and still facing sentences years later. They can really make your life a living hell if they want to. And if there's no mass movement there to support you, if there's nothing there that can cause the authorities to think twice, they are going to do it. Now, fortunately, it seems that the Canadian truckers were able to find an alternative source other than GoFundMe, which, like all of the rest of the other big tech platforms, is completely directed by the government when it comes to things that matter to the government. When it comes to things that really matter, all of these tech platforms fall completely in line because that's where their business interests lie. Their business interests of them and their owners all lie with maintaining a good relationship with the state authorities. I mean, how much business does Google, for instance, do with the American government, with the British government, with the Canadian government? Gigantic amounts. And now, of course, they're turning like all of their attempts at their spy agencies towards trying to attempt to spy on the truckers and their supporters. So this is all intimidation tactics. they won't stop trying this until either the demonstrations dispersed or the force that the truckers and their supporters are able to wield forces the Canadian state back into forces Trudeau to actually make concessions. Because now it's become a challenge between the authority of the Canadian federal government and its regional governments and these truckers demonstrations, the politicians are terrified of backing down and looking weak. So now it's turned into a trial of strength, and the Canadian state is going to keep trying to intimidate people. They're going to keep trying to prevent people showing solidarity. And I hope that it doesn't work. And the reason why I hope that is that if they can organize themselves to actually support each other, to actually guarantee things like legal representation, and also just turn out the sheer number of people on the street to prevent the police enacting mass arrests or anything like that, well, then the Canadian government's got a severe problem, because if enough people turn out, and also if they manage to reach out to the broader working class and bring more areas of the Canadian economy to a halt, then the Canadian state's got a real problem. So they've got a whole range of tools at their disposal for intimidating people and battering them over the head and trying to ruin their lives. But sheer weight of numbers and the weight of the working class can still overcome that, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned, if they could stop the economy somehow, halt the economy, because to me, that would be the next phase, that, this to go from just a protest to a sort of strike movement where you could stop and have the seize the means of production, essentially stop the economy from depend just going on, and have the economy be dependent on these people, and just show how important they are. People have had that idea here of a general strike, but you can't just say, I want a general strike on this day. You have to have the conditions built for it, and you coalitions with other sectors of the working class are extremely important for that. Wildcat strikes are one thing that people have talked about, which are the trucker type of strikes as well, that would just stop the delivery of shipments that would be essential during a time, specifically now when we're having so many delays and already such shortage on labor. But the thing that really bothered me out of that whole statement was that a lot of the left is completely absent. One of the things I said earlier was, where is the pro mutual aid anti-cop left? They're completely absent on this, or not seeing the precedent this is setting.
They're cheering the cops on.
They're cheering them on, essentially. Yeah. And I mean, it's almost like, because you know what, this reminds me of January 6th too, because I was covering January 6th. I had been there for Assange and for a Medicare for All event, and we covered it the next day, and what we saw was entirely different than the vast majority of things that were portrayed. Everybody was portrayed as an insurrectionist, Nazi, white supremacist, and that just wasn't the case. Even if I disagreed with the ideology of the people that were there, to say that it was a bunch of white supremacists was entirely false, but that's how the media portrayed it. They portrayed it as these insurrectionist coup plotters that wanted to overthrow the government, which is hilarious, because if this had been the left, like if the left had been going out to the Capitol and demanding to restore Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders was cheated, which that should have been done in like 2016. Or if the left had been the ones that are stopping production and are fighting against whatever issue, wages or whatever it is, in Canada, they would be all about that. They would be appalled at what the law enforcement is saying, but it's because it's of an ideology and a narrative that they don't support, that they've become on the side of police, just like they were on the side of the Capitol Police who shot Ashley Babbitt. I got called a white supremacist sympathizer for saying she shouldn't have been shot. And we're talking about people who say, the death penalty is wrong and we shouldn't have this. I mean, it just feels like there's been an upside down, and the level of just authoritarianism that we're seeing. I mean, you mentioned it. Yes, it's been here before. For us, it was through the Patriot Act and through now, after the January 6th attacks, now we have the domestic violent extremist, which you could be a radical vegan and be labeled a domestic violent extremist because you are anti the status quo level of what's happening with food production and all of that. So that's what we're seeing. And we never get this back, by the way. We never get back the rights that we lose each time one of these events happen. And for some reason, I don't know if I'm sure you've noticed this, but the left doesn't pay attention to the surveillance state in large part. They completely ignore it as some sort of libertarian free speech. Mom, my free speech. You don't have free speech under capitalism, so what does that matter? They don't talk about Julian Assange, or if they do, they're like mocking it, saying, well, we've never had free speech, so Julian Assange's freedom doesn't really do anything for the greater purpose. And they'll say all these things, but it's like, in terms of Marxist-Leninism and in terms of Marxist theory, they are trying to apply it unilaterally on these issues that are happening, but the surveillance state is never taken into context. And the Ottawa police is expanding their measures to supposedly protect these downtown neighborhoods. And I just imagine if that were a bunch of Marxists that they were protecting, or a bunch of BLM supporters, right? And I think it was you who wrote that thread. And I think I have this later. I might have that tweet later, the Ben Norton tweet.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think you wrote a rebuttal to that. And I forgot to put it in here, but it was a really well done thread where you talked about, which is true, that the funding of the BLM movement, had a lot of liberals and a lot of like people that aren't necessarily, leftist or like working class. And we allow that, but it's not okay in this stance for a few, wealthy Republicans to come in and say, hey, I'm going to give this protest money. It's just, yeah.
Well, yes. And on the surveillance state issue, like, look, our forebears in the working class movements of the United States, Canada, and Britain, all the major countries of the world, all the working class movements demanded that certain rights and liberties be extended to the working class as a core part of their early demands, like the right to vote, the right to freely assemble, the right to actually take part in demonstrations and not be criminalized, not have your head cracked in by the employer's thugs or the police or the army. This is fairly basic stuff. And just to shrug your shoulders when governments across the world launch what is now a 3-decade-long assault, at least, on like basic democratic rights, and say, oh, well, we're not in socialism yet, so let's not bother. Well, so what? We should wait until life gets objectively worse and worse and worse, and then maybe something will happen? No. Like there's people who came before us who paid a very heavy price for the right to vote. They paid a very heavy price, up to and including their lives, for things like freedom of assembly, for freedom to pursue a job unmolested by the state and by the employer, to not be forced by the employer or the state to take medicine against your will. I mean, that's another important freedom. The idea of the left. A lot of the left laughs at the idea of bodily autonomy, the idea of being able to refuse medical treatment. But we know from the history of the medical establishment in the United States and in Britain and in Europe that when they are allowed to, shall we say, go wild, they will find people who cannot say no to medical experimentation, like prisoners, like people in mental institutions, like people who are so poor nobody cares about them and who have no support. And they will conduct barbaric experiments on them. They have done for hundreds of years, and into living memory they have done. So all of these things, the basic democratic rights that do come from the liberal tradition, but the working class has fought for access to them and for the right to things like a fair trial, to decent legal representation, all because that is something which makes life objectively better for working class people under the current system. And I'm not in the business of shrugging my shoulders and saying, well, we're not at socialism yet, so fuck it. What message does that send? Most working class people are going to look at you if you go around like that attitude and thinking, well, why should I listen to you? You're not engaged in the problems facing these people in the real world. You're engaged in an intellectual exercise where you've envisioned in your mind an ideal of the world. And because your ideal of the world doesn't coincide with the reality lived by the actual existing working class, you then say, oh, well, these people are fascists. They've got to be fascists. Look, they've got Canadian flags, that well-known symbol of, the Fifth Reich or something. It's a ludicrous, completely non-materialist analysis, which could only be conducted by people who unfortunately spend all of their time just online, never actually talking to anybody in the real world, in the actual working class. And when they do meet the actual working class, they're probably quite afraid of them. And just to return to your point about the surveillance state, yes, we're not completely free under capitalism. But again, why make it easy for them? Why make it easy for the state and the employers to claim more and more power over your life? Why is that not worth opposing? Why not fight them at every step and make them actually sweat for it at the very least and actually defend these things? Because if we don't, then you're going to be in a situation where everything you try and do, everything you say can be criminalized. I mean, we're already basically there. They have the laws on the books that would enable them to criminalize even the conversation we're having now. The reason why they don't do it is because it would generate too much opposition if they did try and arrest everybody for exercising free speech. But if they're in a crisis, if they are under pressure, then they will use all these laws that they've spent decades putting on the books to try and criminalize people. So again, we need to act in the defense of working class interests. Includes the defense of individual democratic rights and liberties. It has to.
Yeah, and right now on the left, that's not happening. It's just not. It's just they're so out of touch with the actual working class. There's a lot of emphasis on reading theory, which, by the way, I'm for reading theory. I think reading is great, but when you come to somebody with a very arrogant attitude of superiority, and you tell them that they don't understand this, they don't understand socialism, because how could they support these petty bourgeois, truckers? I mean, this is what they say. They say working class, each one of those tractors cost $250,000. Those aren't workers. They own capital. They're small business owners. So the left has pushed away, by the way, the small business owner class. They never pay attention to them, even Democrats as liberals. They don't. So what happens is those people go to the right. And in our measure, at least in the United States, a lot of small business owners are what you said. They're independent contractors. They don't have very much capital to work with, and they're really dependent on the workforce in the economy. And then, when you ask these people, how is this fascist? They don't give you an answer. Like this person said, if in response to somebody asking, do you ask somebody's ideology first before talking to them? And the person said, but if it's a fascist leaning, as in the white nationalist trucker clan rally, which you support, then it really does matter, because somebody else said it doesn't matter, but this person said it does matter. And so to me, it's just like the whole back and forth. It's like, how is a movement, right? I ask, how is a movement of workers across ideologies and races a right-wing movement? And they just say it's just a group of white right-wingers and unhinged religious weirdos. But that's it. There's no proof to this. There's nothing to this. And then they go off on this tangent where they find some of the people who donate, some of the people who went, and they're like, oh, they're tied to right-wingers of Ontario, and it's not just about vaccine mandates, and they tie them to people here. They even went so far as to tie them to people that were there for January 6th that are QAnon. And so it's this whole campaign, the smear campaign, to paint these people as white nationalists. And the worst part is when I see this, and I wanted you to respond to kind of like what you said on your tweet. You kind of already touched on it, but Ben's been a friend, and so this was really hard for me to see, because it's just like, but where are you coming from for this? And he said the trucker convoy in Canada is so obviously a right-wing operation, astroturfed by conservative billionaires. It's absurd seeing some leftists pretend otherwise. This is Texas far-right attorney general, a corrupt Tea Party pet project who try to help Trump steal the election. First of all, I know so much about elections. I'm not even going to get on that, but there was an attempt to get clarity because the United States is an oligarchy and we don't have fair elections in this country, and both parties rig elections all the time. So that is something you don't know about because it's not something you've done the research. But the trucker convoy situation now, when we're talking about the conservative billionaires, why is it okay for BLM, BLM marches and protests to have support from, I think it was not the Koch brothers, but the Soros.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Soros funding in the BLM protests. And when people brought that up, I was like, yeah, I know, but some of these things are necessary, and I'm not going to stand in the way of these protesters doing that. But somehow, if it's flipped, it doesn't add up.
Well, I'll say the last part of that tweet involving the election, actually, to my mind, tells you who his audience for that tweet actually is.
Right.
Because, you learn from watching certain things in American leftist circles, whether when they start ranting about, calling January the 6th an insurrection, when they start calling Trump a fascist or a white nationalist, which, if Trump was a fascist and a white nationalist, then so is every American president since 1945. And I don't believe that. I mean, the remarkable thing about Trump was his similarity, not his dissimilarity. And when they start saying stuff like about, Trump stealing the election, all of that is just virtue signaling for an audience within Democratic Party media elites and political elites. That's what that is. Which is sad to see for a guy like Norton, who has done a lot of very good work over the years, that now apparently he's gone like many other people and drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But the rest of it is barely coherent gibberish because it's just a series of words he stuck together. Far right. Well, again, he never evidenced that. No one who makes these claims ever does. What does far right even mean in the context of Canada? There was some other tweet you put up there from some clueless idiot saying it's a Klan rally. I wasn't aware that the Klan had extensive operations in Canada. Must be something I missed out on. I wasn't aware. I mean, it's ridiculous. This juxtaposition of outdated American terms that were most relevant 50 years ago over to Canada? That doesn't make any sense. The only reason you'd throw it around is as a term of political abuse because you think if I put the term Klan next to these people, then I can discredit them. I mean, if anything, people who are actual fascists, people who are actually committed to the ideals of the National Socialist German Workers' Party would be all in favor of forced medical treatments and all in favor of a rigid system of state control over individual workers. That would be something they'd like. So this idea that this is animated by fascism, these people don't know what fascism is. Who the hell are the fascists in the context of Canada? Who are they? Nobody can really seem to find them other than some right-wing billionaires or millionaires. You could even take it broader. There are individual fascists, and there are in Britain. I've met some of them. But the idea that there is this organized network of fascism out there is a leftist mirage. There's the danger to the American and Canadian working class comes from the capitalist class, the employers, and their government. The reason why you don't have a wave of fascism at the moment is because the established authorities, the state authorities in the United States and Canada, remain at the moment firmly in control. The ruling class only turns to a fascist when they've lost control. And they haven't lost control. They found Trump inconvenient, just as they found Jeremy Corbyn inconvenient and a nuisance to be gotten rid of. but they are not at the point. This is not Germany in 1933. For all that many leftists who spend far too much time tweeting and not enough time getting some fresh air, think that it is. And to deviate into the history for a moment, like the ruling classes in like Italy and Germany turned to fascism when there was literally armed conflict between workers occupying factories and armed gangs of guys paid by the employers to shoot them, beat them up, intimidate them. Like it was a literal violent class war being fought out in the factories and the fields by the workers and the peasants against the employers and the landowners, with the state powerless to stop it. And so they turned to a character like Mussolini, they turned to a character like Hitler and his mass movement of the impoverished middle class who'd been affected by the Great Depression, brought them in to revitalize the state forces and tie the middle class back into the state again. That was all necessitated by actually the strength of the working class in those situations being such that the state couldn't actually act against them in a way that could destroy their organizations, in a way that, because German capitalism was in such a deep crisis, the only way to get out of it was by violently hyper-exploiting the German working class even more. And to do that, they needed a dictatorship, which is why they turned to the fascists, the Nazis. That is not America in 2020, 2021, or Canada in 2022. That is a fantasy cooked up by the freaks that work for Jacobin and they're bought into by various others who want to conjure up this spectre of fascism because it pleases tickles the funny bones of the people in the Democratic Party and in certain sections of the corporate media who have been throwing around the word fascism very loosely over the last 5 years, referring to Trump supporters, as if these people in the ruling class, as if these people in the media elites, where if the American working or Canadian working class got so powerful as to challenge them, they would be the fascists. Those people on the television, those people with the big money jobs, those people in the employers' federations. That's where your actual fascism comes from. Not some guy who's working a job who's just trying to keep himself above water. It originates in the ruling class itself, or the need of the ruling class to revitalize their system via a violent fascist movement being brought into power and instituting a military police dictatorship. So this is leftists cosplaying. It's literal cosplay. It's like trying to find some melodramatic thing to point and get excited about because you can't handle the reality. And the reality is that to actually advance society in any of our countries, Canada, Britain, America, like it's going to take a lot of very hard, patient, and dedicated work amongst the working class for a good period of time, because we've come out of for my entire lifetime, like the organized working class in Britain and the other advanced nations has been kicked around and on a relentless losing streak. In America, your country, it's been going on even longer. So to come out of that is going to take a lot of hard work. And they don't want to do the hard work. They want to pursue shitty media careers to ingratiate themselves with various elements of the Democratic Party and not do that work. And so they throw this term around. They do anything they possibly can to keep themselves in this in the running for, should we say, a secure income from somebody in the media usually. So this isn't serious. People going on about stuff like this aren't serious. And I'm glad they out themselves, because the sooner they out themselves, the better. I mean, you get one more fraud out there in the open, good. And it's sad when you see somebody whose work you've respected do it, but in the end, good. There's an old phrase, I believe it was used by Lenin. He said, better, fewer, but better.
And these people don't understand power, because you mentioned how they what is a right winger? What is a Nazi, a real Nazi? And I've talked about this before, and it's like you can't talk about it because I'm not minimizing that it doesn't exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but what happens and I'm going to speak on behalf of the United States, because what happens in the United States is that you have this sector of post-Trump derangement syndrome that's turned into COVID derangement syndrome, and it's still essentially it's all connected. because they began by having you vilify a sector of the population and having you think that they weren't the same as you. And then the January 6th thing happened, and then it was like, oh, these are the insurrectionists, domestic violent extremists. And then it was, of course, the pandemic, like just surging even more, and all of that happening at once. And it was like, okay, now you can't be near anybody. And it's like this like this mass formation psychosis that we've been talking about, but it's being applied here too thoroughly. And these people don't understand power, because even if you have and there was a few days ago, maybe last week, in Orlando, there was literally like 6 Nazis, like, and Klansmen marching like on the side of the road and yelling, all these like obscenities. And it made all the mainstream media news. It was like this thing. And of course, somebody had put this thing called Vax the Jews. And so it was just perfectly somehow, right, used to just shut down the anti-mandate movement and label it as an anti-vaxxer, racist, anti-Semitic. And then you saw the same thing happen in Ottawa. Like somehow just this flag came up out of nowhere. And I'm just thoroughly convinced that there are people, that like are not seeing past this and are naively just going with what they think is best and what's going to get them more friends. But there are people who know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it because it's going to get them money, is what they think. But I actually think it's not going to work as well as it did before. And I just wanted to show a couple pictures from the Indigenous people in Canada. And they say, the pass system, we needed a pass to leave the reserve. The pass system lasted 50 years. Fight now for your freedom. So that's something of a reminder that if you're a white person, you're more than likely like some sort of evil, right winger now. And and this isn't to say that this doesn't exist, but the way they've hyper focused on it is a whole other thing. And there's just a picture of the Sikhs and of the other people of color. This says, freedom is not a minority opinion. Do I look like a white supremacist to you? And these people are fighting back against this narrative. And it's the same narrative that was painted at the Defeat the Mandates march in DC, where there was, I kid you not, there was a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian speaking one right after the other. There was members of the Green Party Black Caucus. There were white, Black, Asian, Latino, like all religions, but none of that was highlighted. What was highlighted was like the one, somebody had a Trump flag, somebody had an anti-communist flag, and that was highlighted. And it's just frustrating because, especially coming from the left, and I hate that it even matters, but just coming from the left, when you talk about these things, you become a target for this this kind of sort of thing. So it's beyond frustrating. And I thank you for being one of the people to see through it, especially coming from a leftist perspective, because what I noticed is we look at things differently. The right is, a lot of them are anti-mandate, but they come at it a different way, and it's one of those things that, to me, I think it's this issue of mandates isn't just about the vaccine mandates. It's about the autonomy we have over our own thought, over our own discernment of information, over our ability to speak for ourselves. And that is dying very quickly. And it's being cheered on by the people who are anti-imperialists and should see the games of the empire, but for some reason make an excuse for this very thing, an excuse. And I just think it's frustrating, but I thank you for understanding and for talking about.
Well, it's a relief to, shall we say, We find that more and more people are waking up to the problem. And I'll admit that myself, when the pandemic started all the way back in early 2020, I got it wrong in the initial phases and said a lot of dumb stuff that I came to regret. But I changed my opinion on it because the facts didn't match up. Basically, the story that the government was telling, in my case, the British government, didn't match the reality at all. You're told that this is, the Black Death stalks the land again. The Grim Reaper sits in every tree waiting for you. And then you look at the reality and you look at the actual numbers affected, the actual numbers hospitalized, the actual numbers dying, all grim stuff. But you realize that, okay, well, the reality isn't what they said it was. So why is that? And then you have to interrogate your own assumptions. And what I found was that in our case, a lot of the initial thing about lockdowns and then later on about mandating the vaccine was stemmed from a real fear and panic that existed in the British government in March and April 2020, because they'd spent decades shredding the health service to bits. And then they saw what was going on in Italy, or they saw a lot of coverage about a lot of people in hospital. Italy, which by the way had also shredded its health service, and they panicked, thinking that they were going to get exposed because of a lack of capacity. Now, at that point, what everybody who thinks of themselves as on the left should have done was to organize a mass campaign to reverse hospital cuts that have been going on for years. I mean, in your case, it's slightly different, but the US health capacity has been shrinking for years and continued to shrink, and they continue to fire health workers all the way through the pandemic. And we should have a response, a legitimate broad left response should have been a demand for healthcare coverage for all, or like a restoration of the things that have been cut out of the system then. Instead of which, people started supporting the lockdowns, people started supporting all kinds of any strange idea that the government came up with. And they did so, I think, for a couple of reasons. Partly because especially in this country, we just had the defeat of Corbyn in the general election, and a lot of leftists hadn't got over it yet and were desperate for something that they thought would get in the way of capitalism. And they thought that the pandemic was their answer. And I think in your country as well, I think a lot of people who'd fallen out of the Bernie Sanders train jumped on the idea of the lockdowns and the state providing money to people as a way of essentially biting back. They thought it was fighting back against the system by encouraging the state to lock people down. It's a strange mentality, but I think that's what happened. And with this, when this escalated, because as soon as this idea of lockdowns and then later on vaccine mandates got into our very bloated, top-heavy state bureaucracy, then the idea of lockdowns got tied to a whole bunch of people's very, very highly paid careers. It made a lot of people money in the media. And of course, the giant cash cow is the pharmaceutical companies and the development of the vaccines. And of course, once these things get established, as you were saying about the surveillance state, once a government takes an action, especially one with billions of dollars or pounds tied to it, then it's very hard to reverse that. And as we saw with the lockdowns, it was very hard to come out of that, even when governments got panicked and decided they wanted to turn around on it. There was this constituency in the middle class that wouldn't let it go, still won't let it go. They're still trying to cover children's faces in New York City schools, for instance.
Yeah.
And they still won't let it go to this day, because for many of them, they conflate state action, especially what they think is state action over an area of public health, as they call it. They think that that is a road to socialism. They think that the state taking action means that, well, it must mean that it's a danger to profits, or it must mean that it's taking us some distance towards reforms. The mistake that they are making, and I've made this mistake in the past, so everybody's in the process of learning about this as we go, is the mistake that they make, though, is that they think that there's an opposition between capitalism and the state. There isn't. The state is what Lenin called a parasitic outgrowth of capitalism. It's a necessary thing to stabilize the contradictions of capitalism. And it is true that in the past, the working class has addressed demands to the state when the workers were in a stronger position for reforms. But we've been out of the era of reforms since about 1965. All the state has done in the case of the United States and Britain and many other countries now is attack the working class, attack democratic rights, impose things on the working class that are deeply reactionary and only for the benefit of the employers. So this idea that lockdowns, that vaccine mandates, that things like that are somehow going to be what, pro-worker at a time when we have been under unprecedented assault for decades, when the period of reform did exist disappeared years ago. And the idea that, state action is anti-market, all of that is untrue. And all of that has been proven to be horrendously wrong. And for a lot of these people who are still supporting it, it's a case of doubling down because they don't want to admit that they were wrong, because it reveals a huge, both theoretical and practical mistake in their politics. And I had to face that myself when I was getting it wrong, and I had to learn and develop my own critiques better. But hopefully you come out stronger from that. And I'll just conclude on this point by saying that if working class people in the United States think that socialism means a bureaucracy telling you what medicine to take, telling you where you have to go, what you have to do, regulating all the aspects of your life, then the support for socialism is going to remain the staff of the Jacobin editorial team, and that's it. 5 guys in New York City in a loft somewhere does not a socialist republic make.
Well, and that's not a working class either.
No.
They're nowhere near working class, and a lot of these people, I think Max called them the laptop left, but that's an accurate name. I mean, no disdain. I mean, I also work from a computer and from, a studio, but you understand that that's a privileged position. And if you don't leave your studio or wherever you're at, if you don't talk to working class people, you're not going to have a clear view of what this is. You're going to think that this is, 19th and 18th century Russia. And it's ridiculous. It's crazy to me that this is what their response is. No, but these people aren't workers, so we can't support it. It's just reactionary socialism. And Marx warned about reactionary socialism. And I'm just like, but like, this is where we're at. This is where we're at. We're at a crisis where I think, to me, it's we need to face the impending authoritarianism and fascism from the surveillance state, or we're not going to be able to even discuss ideologically the things we prefer and the things we don't prefer. So it's a pivotal moment right now to really, if we were smart, if the left were organized and smart, it would join these protests and create them, in the United States or in Europe. I mean, there's already protests in Europe, and the United States is very lacking. There was one, and like I said, they vilified the hell out of it. But that's it. The protests that happen here happened once, and if it's something that could be weaponized by the mainstream, like the neoliberals weaponized Black Lives Matter for elections, then it'll be on until it's of no use, and then they'll forget about it and nothing happens from it. But if the left are actually smart and organized, they would back this and build bridges to potentially expand into a list of demands, but they're not doing that. So it's a really crappy situation that we're in. But I think we can look forward to really exploring what happens and really seeing this develop. I think it'll be interesting. Perhaps maybe people will realize that the people in power, the surveillance state, the government is not their friend. And I think that happened during the Trump situation with the election. A lot of Trumpers then started saying, well, we should have said something about Bernie, and this and that. And they started questioning the government more, when back in the day, the left used to be the anti-big pharma, anti-Monsanto, anti-censorship. The ACLU okayed Nazis and allowed them to march a few years ago. And now it's like, we're at the opposite end. But Anyway, I want to thank you for coming on and having this discussion with me, and yeah, and just let everybody know where they can find you and where they can look at your work.
Yeah, you can find me on the Twitter handle that's on the screen, ARMackay82, or you can just look up the podcast I do with my co-host, my Canadian co-host, Layla. That's just called Red Star Radio. You can find that on every major platform, presumably until we're deplatformed.
Yeah, right. Are you on Rokfin yet?
Not yet, but it looks like the place to migrate to.
Yeah, definitely check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. I've helped a few people get on there. So if you have any questions, yeah, I think Max is there, Alex is there. So a lot of us are there. So just, it's good to have a different, if we're completely demonetized on YouTube, we just got back from a strike for playing like a milquetoast part of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s speech at the, and it said nothing about, anything, but it didn't matter. So we're on Rokfin, because if we're not going to be somewhere for long. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. All right, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to listening to more of your work as well.
Thanks, Fee.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Oz, I wanted to play some of the videos because I didn't want to interrupt him talking. I wanted to play a couple of the videos out. There's a couple of videos here, of just people of color. Let's play 50. I think it's 53. Yeah. All right, and as you can see, those are Indigenous members over there. So I don't think they're right wingers, but I could be wrong. They could be some radical ultranationalists, white supremacist sympathizers. Let's play the next video.
Thank you. With my heart, let's MRC the CRSE. With our hearts that are up here on this stage, we thank you. Because that's what this movement is about. One heart. And what does that mean? That means love, understanding, acceptance, tolerance. And when we have that, we accept and we respect, and we will respect one another.
And just, guys, to reiterate, that is very similar to what I saw at the Defeat the Mandates March in DC. That's very similar to what I saw then. Just people talking about unity and coming together, and despite their differences and all of these things. So it really angers me when these people who haven't been to any of these protests, right? Because I went to the one in DC, I've covered other ones as well. And the one in DC was extremely intersectional. There are times when it has been a bunch of, in LA, there was, a bunch of Trump supporters leading these protests with their flyers that were like, we have to defeat socialism. And I'm just like rolling my eyes, like, this isn't going to get anywhere if you continue focusing on that. And then I think on one of them, Glory Jones like messaged somebody and was like, can you just take out your partisan crap? And they did, and like it was better. And so again, are there right wingers? Of course there are right wingers. Are some of the funding Republicans, rich Republicans? Sure. But it's the vast majority of the donations on the GoFundMe were like ordinary people donating to them. So, and it's the same crowd. It's the same crowd that's arguing about this Republican funding that has an idiot like Hassan Piker just buying a $200,000 car, and has rich people that work, like actual wealthy upper class people like Emma Vigilant and these people that work at Jacobin that are not working class at all. And they're just so, oh, this is a right-wing non-leftist movement. And it's very just, it's the opposite of anything remotely socialist. And what I forgot to bring up with Alexander that I wanted to bring up is that these people are pushing the working class into the right. And I've said this before, but I think people need to understand what I mean by this. They're pushing people to find solace in the right. And I'm not necessarily saying, that this situation we're in is a left-right paradigm, but you're creating that paradigm further by doing that, because you're not attacking the top, you're attacking each other. And so what's happening is any notion of socialism or communism is associated with these idiots that don't understand the current material conditions that we are in, and they don't understand the surveillance state, and they don't understand like anything that's been happening for the last couple decades since the war in Iraq, and how we've been losing our civil rights and civil liberties, which are things you fucking care about if you want to, I don't know, maybe usher in a new system of government. You care about those things, because without freedom of speech, freedom of the press, without freedom to say anything that is of dissent, you are not going to get that revolution. And you're not going to get that revolution when you come in arrogantly telling people they're dumb and they need to breathe theory, when people are having such a hard time right now, have lost their jobs, their homes, their apartments. It's a dire situation. Maybe their family members have died. Things have happened, and people have gone through a trauma, especially children. And you're coming in and you're saying, well, you just need to read more theory, because if you read more theory, you would know that these truckers are petty bourgeois, and the petty bourgeois are not working class. And these people, these people that you're talking to, the vast majority of them are going to look at you like you are the biggest fucking idiot in the world, because you're speaking Chinese to them, and you're not understanding where people are coming from. You're coming at it from an elitist standpoint that has nothing to do with their lives and the situations they face. You don't go down into the streets and talk to them. You don't understand what the working class is. And it's these people that are the most anti-mandate. They're the most pro, let's just go on lockdown because I'll be fine if we go on lockdown. That's a lot of people won't be fine. A lot of people will be screwed. And so that's really what is irritating to me, I think, most of all. So thank you guys so much for watching. I think I have a couple super chats. One from Seattle. Thank you so much for the super rig contribution. It is always appreciated on the couch. Eric Benitez, thank you so much for the Super Ray contribution. Shadowban refugee, orale, no mames, Shadowban. The left, in its obsession with identity and power, has lost its identity and refused to exercise its what? I think you left something out. But I agree, Shadowban. I agree 100%. There was this argument on Niko's thread, because Niko was like, we can't let these people take the left. They're not the left. And I can see both sides, right? And Kim was like, yeah, but they're what's known as the left. They're what everybody is now calling the left. And I kind of agree with that. It's like, how far do you fight for this sort of labeling? Because at this point, it doesn't fucking matter, right? Like, what is the left? And I've asked this question to other people, and I've had this discussion. Recently I interviewed in New York. Like, what is the left? What is that? That's a question that came up. Like, what is the left right now? If the left is doing these things, if the left is going after people who are fighting back against authoritarianism. If the left is really cheerleading, as Alexander said, cheerleading the cops to go after these people, if the left is labeling everything under the sun that they don't like as a Nazi white supremacist, then is that a left you want to be a part of? No. Is it a left that is representative of what really the left was? Not really, but I mean, is it worth even like fighting for that label? Because at this point, I think we should be past these labels in terms of the organizing and how we look at things. It's very much top down. And even though, like I said, we come at this from a different perspective, from the mandate perspective, we come at it from a different perspective, it doesn't mean that that's the most important thing at all. Because the reason I want to have leftist voices on is to dismantle the bullshit that this is a bunch of right wingers and that's all that the anti-mandate movement is about. But beyond that, it's bigger than that. It's the fact that if it's more people on the right, or if it's independents or people who don't adhere to labels, that doesn't matter, because that's workers, right? Workers uniting and coming together and fighting against an authoritarian regime and an oppressive oligarchy. You're never going to have a revolution of people that you only agree with. It's not going to happen. It's never happened before like that. Even in 1917, Russia, and it's just never happened. It's never happened like that, like where everybody agreed with everything. And so that's I think what a lot of us are saying. Like you have to work with people who are workers, and maybe perhaps you can talk to them about why you believe certain things you believe in, but you're never going to force people to be something without them having the willpower to do it. So yeah, anyway, guys, I don't know if there's any more, because my computer is like, I need to get my computer fixed. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's like freezing. But guys, thank you so much for watching. Oh, thank you, Trace Allen. I crazy right now, so I'm just gonna.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna.
Can I get Medhurst? Yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, Oz, thank you so much for your help today. And Pasta will be back on Wednesday, and we will have a show. We're going to discuss some things on Wednesday, probably on Rokfin only, because we were discussing some statistics. And Franco's doing a great job of just throwing statistics at these people, just being viciously attacked by Mike Preisner, because it was weird, very unhinged, very rude, very, Pasta was very nice and calm. I was pretty calm up until a certain point, and then I just stopped. And I got feisty. I'm like, okay, now you're being an asshole. They always bring up Tulsi to me. Like, I didn't vote for Tulsi. Like, it's just hilarious. Tulsi, every time they talk to me, and I'm like, it's just hilarious. But yeah, we're probably going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about Shaq and a couple other things. So love you guys. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you Wednesday. Convo out.